Hi guys. So I don't know why exactly, but I decided to try making April a special month of movies, and if you can see by the runtime and what I'm about to show, I think I succeeded. Have a lot of recommendations, a lot of experiences for you, so let's go. Drive My Car by Ryusuke Hamaguchi was powerful. Moving, even. It's a 3-hour drama that so tightly keeps up with its characters. The entire third hour feels like one emotional climax after another, and not by cranking up the volume as if it feels it needs to justify being such a large-scale drama. Later scenes achieve such heights because they're uplifted by a well-crafted foundation. Each character, even if seen in small parts, is given enough treatment that we could believe they are their own people, living their own lives and stories outside of this one. People feel real, which is imperative, I think, to make this adaptation work at the level it does. In the first 40 minutes, we're introduced to Yusuke and his wife, becoming absorbed in this drama that after a sudden tragedy is revealed to have been a 40-minute prologue, and yet it all works beautifully. Communication is the primary interest of the film, how individuals form a bridge between themselves, and to what extent we truly can or even want to. And the notion of language extends beyond what we'd traditionally associate it with. A character speaks in sign language, the most overt hinting at the physical manifestations of language. But jumping off of this, we have sex, and as the title points out, the driving of Yusuke's car. When he and Masaki first meet, we sense that they both share a reclusive, defensive nature about them. We can assume at some point they will form a contact and help each other grow out of his mourning period and whatever her situation might be. But that contact opens up when at a dinner, Yusuke lets out his unabashed praise of her driving. Plays out quietly and even comedically in the moment, but we can feel a kind of light flickering on, the start of a frozen bridge thawing. And that's the kind of deftness emotional plotlines are treated with. There are always multiple arcs going on, and it's patient enough to let it all happen naturally. Yet, even with the serenity it presents with its free-flowing ribbon of through lines, storm and turmoil are an ever-present backdrop. The volatile, simmering underbelly of Murakami's writing is still at play. If you've seen Burning, you could recognize the connection by the first scene. Life isn't so sweet and smooth. Reaching the convoluted avenues required to really connect with people isn't easy. There's lots of darkness inside us as well. The plays that Yusuke is assembling and the film itself is, in a way, a bit of a showboating testament to this idea, crossing multiple language barriers and personal barriers in order to reach the sum of their art is also all played in naturalistic behind the scenes of the casting, rehearsals, and on even more levels, Yusuke practicing lines in his car. But if elaborate intellectualism isn't your draw, could I offer you the vibe cinematography, a gentle textured soundtrack, a red Saab 900 Turbo, which believe it or not is what each person receives after finishing the movie. The highways traveled or glided on, and when pulled back, revealed as roadmaps possessing a live calligraphy. You feel you're being handled right. There's so much I could go on about. The multi-layered acting that's required through all these, levels of acting in the film. The more poetic form of its reflecting narratives into life. The way that it's 3 hours is designed to just fly by, but this is supposed to be a quick review, so just watch it yourself. It's worth it. Your Name. So at last I saw for myself the number 3 top grossing anime movie of all time. An international breakthrough. I mean, when this thing came out, as somebody who follows anime, it was like making the big time in theaters in America, everybody watching it. I didn't actually catch it in theaters. I mean, part of me wanted to, but keeping myself from getting spoiled, I knew it was about a body-swapping romance and some pretty sky shots. It kind of struck me as not something I'm particularly rushing to see, and after having finally seen it, I'm not wrong. So this was my proper entry into Makoto Shinkai. I did see Garden of Words a long time ago, but it is a short, and I honestly don't remember much besides the total anime lo-fi vibes porn that it sat within. But yeah, it kind of tracks for Your Name. This was a disappointment. I don't resent it for having the spot it does in anime film history. It's just that it falls under movies that get to that spot by being as unchallenging, broadly appealing, and therefore as meh as possible. Don't hurt me. I was waiting for the two main characters' personalities to emerge from the whole body swap conceit, but they never did. At some point they were just in love with each other, and I had no reason to understand why. They just fall in love because fate tells them to. I mean, anybody can see that the whole body swapping and learning about each other through their lives shtick is supposed to lead them to a romance, right? But expectations aren't a good justification for how your story progresses on their own. Until the end, they remain painfully generic, let alone the groups of secondary characters surrounding them. Oh my god. But those complaints probably aren't even the hot part of my opinion. I feel like people who love this film know that they're sort of streamlined characters and whatever. But some of you gotta get ready for what I'm about to say next. This did not even look especially good. I'ma hold back, bearing in mind I didn't see this in the theater, but I can still see the quality of animation going on my nice computer where I watch all my other movies most of the time, and it is, like all the other ingredients here, industry standard. Professional standard, yes. High professional standard, sure, but in terms of providing any kind of new, distinct, or above and beyond quality, nah. There was one small bit, I guess, they decided was going to be the super animated part, where Mitsuha's model runs to her dad's office during the event at some point, and it switched over to 3D animation on her, and everyone else who was just there in those scenes, giving them that uncanny training dummy characteristic that older CG anime does. So people saying this is saving traditional 2D animation, can it? The actual animation itself is especially basic. Nothing very physical is ever happening, and they don't care enough to imbue those moments with the heightened detail or emotion that anime does, where even small moments, because it's an animation, are presented as these large, personality-rich details to take in. That's not here. The only parts that warrant it being anime are obviously the super wide sky shot scopes of the vistas, but like, those aren't unique or special either. It's kind of like a given that if you do that, a guarantee to make people go, oh, or whoa. So everybody does that. It's like wallpaper art, and that is the high point of your feature-length film. It was inoffensive enough. I was feeling a 5 out of 10. No hate, no love for it, through most of the runtime. But the last section of this film relies entirely on you being invested in the characters the script is built up. Because otherwise you would notice that literally nothing is happening except they're on their train tracks as we're waiting for the inevitable conclusion. A lot of the climactic segments had me laughing when I was supposed to be worried or upset, and the final segment I was talking about had me bored or impatient when I was supposed to be on the edge of my seat. So by exposing how thoroughly it failed to create a central emotional reason for its existence, the movie fell down a notch to below average. Just a bit, but below average. That's my honest opinion. I know a lot of you love the shit out of this. Now for a movie nobody knows and I love. The Strangler is a Paul Vecchiali film. I've never seen any of his movies. For the Giallo fans in the house. Despite it being categorized as more a proto-Giallo, as it's more of a crime story following a serial killer, but introducing surreal elements. Regardless how you categorize it, this one is a hidden gem. I want to fast track to the script, which is honestly genius. It works on a lot of subtext, saying more about society and gender and happiness, more than serial killers. The one caveat you'll find is I think it has a frayed set of conclusions. It feels like a fast-paced production, the kind that studios saw as genre fare to be cranked out, which happens to a lot of older genre films, especially when they weren't given much respect even when time shows them to have been helmed by auteurs who are working to elevate it to art. It needed to polish out the final details, tie everything together in a nice bow. It's a bit leaky, but I've likened it to Crash, the Cronenberg one, where the overt plot, here about a serial killer on the loose and investigators trying to catch him, becomes more about a small cast of characters becoming embroiled in this enclosed, semi-allegorical exploration of humanity. The story really reveals what it is when the murders take place. Suddenly we enter a skewed world where the killer's justification that he's murdering these women out of pity and is actually helping them is strangely not a lie, There's a pas de deux essence to the lead-up and action of the Stranglings. It's the film taking off its mask of sensationalism and giving way to introspective darkness. I found myself imagining, while the movie was going on, what a reboot could do to expand on a lot of the angles that should arise from its commentary. Because surely this film from 1970 wasn't overtly addressing these ideas. But to my amazement, as the plot developed and took a series of turns, it went there. It broaches these taboo subjects and wants its unsettling subtexts to be there. There are multiple ways that Vecchiali decides to do dream sequences that all feel like they were taken and are now associated with horror films of the 80s and 90s. The soundtrack can get a little too funky for what the film is going for, with some melancholy, throw some melancholy in there. It comes together to make a sordid, dark, even brooding subversion of a serial killer story. At the start, we take for granted that the motivation behind the character's obsession with the killer is for justice, but as things carry on, the obsession reveals sordid truths about each player in the thickening web. It feels like a commentary on true crime, and genres that hadn't even entered in full force yet, as well as repression and gender roles. I know this might be a cliche way to put it, but the movie is for feeling like, after thinking you're on the hunt for the killer, you slowly feel the soft rope materializing around your neck and pulling tighter. As your breath goes, the snugness of it all becomes comforting. Like you can just let go. Rouge by Stanley Kwan. So again, this movie has a lot of love, high recommendations, curations, but didn't do too much for me. None of the characters were interesting, which devastates a core aspect of the film. It's good and bad, because it does exist as its thematic framework and intellectually worthwhile dialogue on the time split of Hong Kong. But it succeeds to me as only those frameworks, being completely disposable in the realm of character and humanity and emotion. On a personal level, it failed to live up to more than a representation. The plot moves like a coin flipping between two Hong Kongs, the old and contemporary, for 1980s, bearing the blemishes and beauties of both. The transactional nature of lives and love in the past, even with its ravishing aesthetics, and the progressive, rational relationship in modern times. A much more drab, industrial, and commercialized environment. It suffers from a TV special type quality. The score, funny enough, aged pretty poorly, really amplifying the after-school artifacting with its synthy, plucky keys, you know the ones. And there's this androgyny angle that's sold pretty hard by Criterion, but I didn't see it playing any huge role. Coming from Farewell My Concubine, which I found much more unabashedly challenging in that manner. Chung and Mui aren't giving bad performances. I wouldn't chalk it up to them for their characters' flatness. No, I think they put a lot of effort into them, but they're doomed from the start with this script that provides nothing for them to build off of. I went in for the Chung connection, but he really got nothing to let him shine here. It's definitely Mui who takes the spotlight. The cinematography is ravishing, extravagant. Like, while watching it, objectively, it is a pretty great film, and there are so many interesting things to think about. It ages well when it's in my head, more so than when watching. I guess it is aiming to convey something immaterial. It's not the kind of story you expect if you see all the promo and go in blind, that's for sure. And that shift does linger like a forlorn haunt after the credits close. But this is one where I was actively keeping myself watching for a good middle portion. The Resonator, Miskatonic U by William Butler. This was an embarrassing film that is very useful for entertaining time. I'll just give a few bullet points to give an overall impression. This is a ripoff of From Beyond, the Lovecraft story and film that already exists. Mr. Tillinghast from Miskatonic U. My favorite shot in the movie, a hard cut to a slow-mo dad walking towards us and then fading away. This is before we know that that's what his dad looked like. It's a very Neil Breen level cinema moment. Our genius scientist, Mr. Tillinghast, takes a god class in a humid courtroom where he rebuffs the professor with the concept of atheism. Cue the bell ending his monologue, leaving Professor shook. There's some kind of a weird homeopathy cult that isn't relevant till the very, very end because we see two people are in it. All the actors look well into their 30s and they're playing college students. The lady alien thing, you know, from the poster, shows up once, dances, has sex. It's one of the guys in a sort of purple orgy, then never comes back. One of the girls gets impaled, so everyone carries her to an empty hospital where they have to do all the medical work. They put her on ice, is what they say, and the next day she is fine and walking. There's a character named Brian. I got to elaborate on this one. I think the message of the film is fuck Brian, cause you see, Brian dies a grisly death at the very beginning of the movie because our main character is a psychopath. So they're starting the experiment and opening the portal, and obviously something evil comes out. Brian dies horribly, and our main character brushes it right off. There's a really random line where the antagonist of the movie responds to a lie about Brian being in jail by saying they'll love that little twink. When all the other characters are grilling our main boy Tillinghast about where Brian is because he's been missing and his bloody clothes were found, he still denies it. He just lies to their face. They, oh, what happened to Brian? Oh. I'll mention that the final attack is fought by our lead with hitting all the abominations with a shovel. And at the very end, Herbert West, yeah, that's right, that Herbert West joins in like an MCU cameo. For a second, I actually thought they got Evan Peters. And good news, doing some research on this, there is actually a sequel already made. It looks better, but I have to convince my friends to watch it, since we saw the first together, and we'll ride to the end on this together. Unfortunately, I'm getting a kind of a vibe that some of them don't really want to do it. I don't know why. I really want to see where all these fascinating characters go from here. So stay posted for next month. Maybe there'll be a Beyond the Resonator Miskatonic U, The Rise of Xialarthatep. Dreadnaught is a Hong Kong kung fu film full of madness and fury. My first whooping Yuan, which did not disappoint in being frantically entertaining. Dreadnaught takes place in a world run on the currency of kung fu. What makes it on the lower end of what I've seen is that it lacks as strong an identity. The various set pieces and conflicts are a random jumble of elements, spontaneously leaping around a default setting of a town with two rivaling schools. Bao Yun plays Mousy in the likable but caddish protagonist role. He might be a coward, but his jacked body, honed by his time working in the family laundry business, will surely unleash laundry-style kung fu mastery later on. The main cast, those on the good side, are all the best characters. The villains, including the kinda good, kinda evil ogre man of a sheriff, are less memorable and use more cliche comedic bits. The White Tiger, a deranged outlaw who wears a face paint mask like a kung fu Michael Myers, is the memorable one. But script-wise, starting on the White Tiger sets up the wrong expectations. You'd think the beginning segment is leading to him being like a character with an arc or some humanity, but then he's nothing but a rabid dog. He only serves as a serial killer slasher type figure, so beyond giving us a hilarious and dramatic opening fight number, it serves as one example of the thrown together nature Dreadnaught suffers from. Where this movie really gives you your money's worth though are the action sequences like the lion dance fight. A bonkers ass fight breaks out during the performance with two men to a lion costume fighting, going on and on. But in truth, the insane ideas for fights don't end there. Don't get me wrong, for pure entertainment value, I could ease up and give it a more enticing rating. But as I've been getting into Hong Kong action a little bit more, I've seen how absolutely batshit it can get. This is still an easy recommendation. The next film I watched was Ikarie XB-1 by Mr. Polak. This is the Czechoslovakian space travel sci-fi film from 1963. It plays like a string of what would be episodes in a sci-fi adventure series, but strung together into one narrative film. You have their normal daily lives, as well as the technologically impressive layout of the ship. You have the mysterious spacecraft they encounter in dead space, where they send two men on board and peel back a dark mystery revealing its backstory. The infection that leads to one crew member going mad and threatening the rest of the crew and their mission. The reason this film is notable is the set design. The look achieved for this interpretation of 22nd century space travel clearly inspired future iterations, notably Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. There's robots and even a comedic old robot, space food served by the main computer at set times, and my favorite piece of design, the security cameras slash PAs that look like glaring eyeballs. It's a bit unpolished in some of the props and details, like the handmade quality pokes through sometimes, especially when it's watched decades later in an HD restoration. I mean, for fans of retro sci-fi, it has that charm to it. As in many respects the innovator, it can get away with that, as most of it does transform into a believable, immersive setting. It emphasizes the humanity of the astronauts, presenting a human race of intelligence, camaraderie, empathy, freedom. I admit for me, the film has a crucial flaw. It is a dry ride, and I had to actively keep myself engaged. The characters are nice, but kind of bland and interchangeable because of it, existing as snapshots and representative moments of normal life rather than interesting ones. It has that Eastern Bloc, almost propaganda motive underneath it, but it looks to a future that's left the horrors of the 20th century behind, rather than making some political endorsement for its current era. If you're a die-hard sci-fi fan, though, and haven't seen this yet, you're probably gonna get way more out of it than me. From here, things get crazy. So, I've been sitting on this DVD that I received the day he announced he is releasing, freshly pressed, Cade the Tortured Crossing from www.cade-crossing.com. But before we see the resolution to the saga of Cade, we have to revisit Twisted Pair. I think this is the third time that I've watched this, and each time has felt like it's my first time. This Breenian cyber phantasmagoria begins with twin brothers Cade and Kale, who were abducted by higher life forms and melded with AI, cyber, and nanotechnology. Cade, Breen, uses his powers in government operations and espionage, concerning especially the field of AI, gene editing conspiracies by the global conglomerate. But Kale, also Breen, has fallen out of his calling, or is it a curse, living out a meager existence, stripped of his modifications, taking drugs, and I think helping the other side in the developing battle for AI intelligence. See, I once considered this a weaker installment in Breen's catalog, but Twisted Pair has grown on me with each revisit. Whenever one thinks Breen might be missing, no, it's just the mind needing to catch up. For instance, listen as I really put together all that's in this movie. Cade has a love interest as well, a lady who works with the same agency, I think. They have a kinky roleplay thing where they pretend not to know each other in front of a homeless man. Then Breen pretends to stalk her and break into their house to play I mean, it looks like it's fun for them, so why not? The location used in this project is notable, as Breen was able to shoot at a university after hours. That, or this is a world where humans are nocturnal. And I don't know if you know, but community colleges have a distinct air about them that you can't see as anything other than a community college. It's a hilarious disconnect from Breen's vision, but also works as feeling Lynchian in its own way. So the director's ineffable charm goes charming on. The action in this one is expanded upon, with mind-bending special effects. There's Superman jumps, military combat, exploding buildings, the whole shebang. The traditional Breen mysticism even returns, with an evil art collector. He has a transforming scarf and demon voice, who likes to play with his bowl of diamonds, and also has a fairy through some unknown connection. Breen's dual performance as both Cade and Kale is staggering. From super agent who has it all, to Kale, the fallen, the bumbling, the tormented. The domestic abuse scene he has with his girlfriend is just harrowing. It is something that could be straight out of Twin Peaks: The Return. Witnessing all of these Breenisms taken to these heights has given me a new appreciation for Twisted Pair, and I now put it up with most of his catalog, which are near perfect experiential cinema. But speaking of Cade, the Tortured Crossing. Disclosure, both of the Neil Breen films discussed here were screened together in a group setting. And by the time we were on this one, Things were a bit chaotic. Add to that the DVD, the one I had since ordering day one of release, does not come with subtitles, or a menu for that matter. So without being able to hear half the words being spoken, this shit was even more confusing than it already looked. One burning question that I'll have to investigate on rewatch is whether the actors were supposed to be playing multiple different characters, because the cycle of sleeping homeless kids who get kidnapped off the street is unbelievably absurd when you add that it's the same person getting abducted over and over again. Did they escape the hospital? And in multiple scenes that look like death scenes, the same person is back in the hospital doing the same things right after. There are these gray faceless people imposed behind the patients in certain shots. So we were wondering if, like, their spirit is getting taken when the unseen evil force attacks them. But my initial verdict, sad to say, is that this is on the weekend of Breen's filmography, and there's a better chance it'll stay there. Namely because things keep repeating over and over in the midsection, an amount of times that makes you feel crazy or like the disc is skipping back. There are plenty of little golden nuggets to pick out from this section, but along with the all-encompassing green screen, even longtime fans of Breen will likely lose patience. But I'd also like to say, the highlights in Cade remain some of Breen's finest moments. I don't want to spoil anything for those waiting for it to come on streaming, but trust. Breen's character entrance, the white tiger, the dance number, the fight scenes, and Cale's final emotional monologue. These easily made the movie worth it and shows Breen isn't slowing down. I honestly think this was a pandemic movie. Breen had a little video showing off the green screen studio he acquired for this. And yes, everything is 100% green screen effects, done the Breen way. But for real here, it comes off as a restriction to the film. Part of the greatest magic of a Breen film is that odd space of the set where him and his actors are interacting with the bluntness of the real world. This is trying to crush it all into like a two-dimensional form. I think Breen, unflinching artist he is, has the mantra of putting films out there no matter what. So he completed his Cade saga, Limitations Be Damned. I don't think it signals a laziness or a self-awareness like I've heard from other reviews. I'm pretty sure, or just hoping, that when he returns with his next, it'll be as ambitious as ever. Roll up the goddamn windows. What reason was there that you couldn't have the windows up? I'm literally going back and just trying to piece it together. But yes, the medical facilities, the romance plots, the plots that go absolutely nowhere. Makes for a psychedelic experience. It's like a trip that goes from good to bad to good, as far as you know before blacking out, leaving you into the next day confused, concussed, not knowing where the hell you've been. The Comfort of Strangers by Paul Schrader. This Venice Menace picture conjures both the otherworldly beauty and decay of the floating city. I mean, with films like Death in Venice and Don't Look Now, you could make a case for the place harboring its own sub-genre. We follow a young couple in an ambiguous state of a relationship who run into the path of an older, locally entrenched couple whose interest in the pair feels less than innocent, downright sinister, as their meetings continue. The photography of this film is absolutely stunning. To be carried through this getaway world, day and night, is a worthwhile ride. Add to it a score by Mr. Badalamenti himself, and ooh, let me tell you, kind viewer, you are in the heart of cinema. It's a fantasy film taking place in reality. Everything is utterly bewitching. The city, the lights, the tourists, the couple, the Armani, the decadence, the interiors, the cafes, beaches, gondolas on the waters throwing caustic lights over the walls. Good on the A-team involved here for really putting you into this vacation space, that liminal state where the entirety of your life has been left far away. And as the couple ventures deeper into this unfamiliar zone, it feels like they could be spirited away with one careless misstep. But what's with the menace? Forced castration is uttered in a seemingly glib contrast of dialogue that nevertheless lingers over events like a crucial piece of some puzzle. It feels as if blood is running under their feet instead of water. One of my favorite moments in the film is just this one shot where we cut to the old couple's apartment and no one's in it. This location, by the way, is ravishing and hypnotic. It invokes the old world, lost to modernity, but in a sense of both its beauty and cruelty. So why did we suddenly appear here as a camera floating through it at a point when neither pair are there? It's one of the creepiest things you can get at the cinemas, made from one unusual choice. The Paul Schrader connection is easy enough to spot. Christopher Walken plays a character who slowly unveils like a living ghost of the old world machismo, the one where men slap around women and demand utter dominance. His introduction to himself, which repeats on multiple occasions, is through a portrait of his father, a big man who kept his mustache black and his family terrified of him. The interest he has to our male protagonist, Colin, in particular, twists into a domineering test of masculinity. The couple's new way involves wanting to be together, but not being married, and Mary's history of divorce and 2 kids, one a boy, one a girl. Even before anything irreversible happens, the couple is noticeably challenged by a rule of law that augurs violence, humiliation, and implacableness. The ending is the thing that kind of limits this movie's overall impact. The journey is so rich, so worth going on for its own sake, but without spoiling it, the resolution is just an ending. And considering all the suspense and unspoken dangers leading us into it, I thought it had to be something exceptional. Still, Comfort of Strangers makes an overall good to great experience. The Fabric of the Human Body by Verena Paravel and Lucien Casting-Taylor. The director's work is what is termed sensory ethnography. I fell head over heels for Leviathan, their last work on a fishery boat. I'm in a position where I'm familiar enough within the medical world to know some of these procedures cursorily, be shocked at actually seeing others, and with a few, have first-hand experience in that environment to where I can point to the screen and say, hey, that's me. But in this case, expertise might be impeding this film's ability to work its abstract magic upon me. It also felt much less focused on what purpose the method of their live-wire documentary style is serving. More segments in this have static images and focus on dialogue. Endless dialogue gives the presence of people and normal perspective to the body horror. On one hand, that is a point of the documentary. There's a focus on the healthcare workers, the realities of their workload, and even the unexpected use of talking during surgeries, often focusing away from the surgical action, remaining detached in a sense. And even by going as freakishly close into the action as possible via micro cameras, we are also ingesting a kind of detached perspective. Tissues and gooey parts become abstracted images and landscapes, twisting in and out of recognizability to stirring, unnerving effects. There are absolutely some hard parts to watch. If you're squeamish, maybe don't pick up this one, but it is in service of a scientific lens. There's no censorship in the medical reality of our bodies. It's gore categorized a bit differently from the obscene. Cronenberg definitely comes to mind, a director who brings in a scientific background and blurring the lines. Just look at his latest Crimes of the Future. Under anesthesia, the dissection of the human body is what you make of it, I suppose. I came in expecting the internal camera work to make up the framework of the movie, and after seeing it, I wish it did. Those were the best parts. And there's a transformative effect that sticking us to the human tissue world would have when prolonged. It happened in Leviathan. Instead, you have a mundane distance on the surgeons and patients. My least favorite part of the movie is a repeating cutaway to mental health patients. We're following them walking, agonizingly slow, and repeating the same incomplete sentences over and over. There's a patient trying to elope. It's kind of hard to watch. The directors clearly wanted this to be a connecting tissue to all the surgical bits, but to me it fell really flat as to what symbolism it provides by being structured this way. And it didn't come off as connecting to the sensory segments that they're taking time away from. The ending scene, though, is easily the most amazing thing in the movie. I mean, it's so strange what's on screen. It's hard to believe it wasn't designed. It makes me wonder about what is trying to be conveyed in a cinematic sense by all that came before. Like Leviathan with its Moby Dick, death metal violence spirit, there's a similarly deep well of lore to explore here in medical art. If there was more of that creativity and shape-shifting element to the main body of footage, or the editing, it could have elevated into said realm. But don't take this and just spoil the ending. You have to wade through the gauntlet of all that comes before to really experience the eureka moment of that scene. The main takeaway of the film, though, forgetting any of that other crap I was talking about, is to fund the goddamn healthcare system. House of Tolerance by Bertrand Bonello. Our tale begins at the turn of the 20th century, but right off the bat, not in a normal way. No, it's gotta raise some eyebrows and clue you in. See, we're right there. Literally a turn of a century, which I feel like is touching on some irrational cosmic scale that we, especially those of us who saw the turn of a millennium, associate with our categorization of time, even if it's just one continuous passing. There's an unreeling effect to it that I think is styled intentionally and cues us to a state of mind, obliquely surreal and abstract, that the film will be diving into. Timeless in a sense, despite the trappings of its period piece setting. We are following sex workers, after all, the oldest job, the job present in all times, all cultures. It's one that bleeds into way more than any old occupation, so it does lend itself to this abstracted filmmaking that I think is being offered to us. There's something very postmodern about the familiarity of its many ingredients, making something new. Flowers of Shanghai is a big one. I would distinguish this by how immersive it becomes. If you find yourself working in a career you don't care for, trapped there long enough that it's regardless become your identity in the world, this one will hit you deep. The cloister of these women inside of this house is viewed almost like the inside of an organism. They operate as parts that are the whole when taken together, but they are treated also as individuals, as that is in reality how they live and to think about found themselves operating this way. There's a healthy mix of the ones you come to recognize via some traits or looks, and a few that become prominent. So there are at least a few characters you can follow and invest yourself in like protagonists. As the film just keeps going on, you feel the weight of the question, how much longer can this last? But of course, things will keep going on this way. For a reason we try to admire, but deep down kinda also fear. Humans will endure. In any circumstances we find ourselves trapped in, we tolerate it. So questions arise. Who are we? What are we doing? It takes a lens also to the societal machinations that have designed them to be in this role. The men who frequent the house aren't living their true lives either, but they take the comfort of superiority and their normal life they can fall back on. You see the support network that these women have amongst each other, treated with a kind of casualness that belies its seriousness, as this work would be too much if they didn't have each other. But the humanity within the system, allowing its members to go on, thus perpetuates that same system that traps and poisons them. So yeah, the nature of this cinematic presentation is very mirrored within itself and also at the audience. You turn dark hallways and find yourself in sad, frightening scenarios. Spending time in this film feels like a beautiful nightmare. So I watched the director's next work, Nocturama. Once again, I've definitely seen a number of films that this is taking from. Elephant by Gus Van Sant, the one Bresson film I've seen, luckily, The Devil Probably, and any number of terrorist crime thrillers, and again Lynch. The surreal elements and how they come into the film remain surprising and fresh, in large part owing to the procedural realism that makes the first act. There's a lot here about identity. What's it made of? What are you? How much of it is even really you or what you're supposed to be? What do you even want to do? The first act maintains a very tense feeling throughout. These kids are wandering all around France, organized to some degree we can't pinpoint yet, but after a deed is done, they enter the mall, and when they get there, it slowly unravels into a horror-like mood, even though pointing at what's on screen wouldn't be described as horror. It's like water that heats up 1 degree at a time until you're boiling in it. The mall is just that kind of environment that when inhabited in this limbo space lends itself to an abstracting multi-lensed property. Just think of Dawn of the Dead. But here, who are the zombies, the death, and who's the normal? The layers are always shifting, inverting. The ways you could look at it. The first part is actually the fantasy, and the second, realism. But when I was watching it, it felt the opposite. until it didn't. I mean, think about it. The over-neutrally shot planning and carrying out of this operation, complete with the time of day markers popping on screen. There's a suave current to their collaboration, their performance of meticulously setting up explosives while remaining undetected in this adult world. You have young guys in suits, after an ample amount of time finally revealing that they're packing heat. A certain stylishness, we all know. A motley crew of youngsters from different backgrounds, all templates for a wide audience to attach themselves to. I mean, you see what's going on here? With the titans of Nolan and Tarantino and a whole generation of cool crime media. This is the fantasy that's played out in every young mind at some point, in some way, rebelling against the system, against the rules. But then the aftermath in part 2 is where we have nothing to do but look at these characters. They have nothing to do but be seen and look at themselves. Suddenly the terrorist act is treated as the reality. They managed to do it. Now we're in the real world where the immense consequence of it looms. The dread grows beyond any of the imaginable punishments you would know from disobeying your parents. Death seems to materialize in everyone involved. The reality of what doing something big, historically relevant entails comes into focus. It's war. Retaliation is death. This is one where I've got to rate it, and rate it high before I can fully formulate why. I just know the effect of it really hit me. I was nervous and terrified in some way about my life, I guess. And that makes a great time, don't you think? 2001, arguably the greatest film ever made. I still had not seen it, but I saw that I had a good streak going, and you need something that you know will keep it going. There's nothing I need to add about this movie. It's a preeminent, even self-aware, achievement in the art form. I mean, so many, fuck it, maybe all, of the big moments in 2001 have saturated our culture. So a big part of what I hoped to learn was how these moments actually come together in a film, because it was always hard to imagine how we get from this iconic scene to that, monkeys to robot. Turns out it's not a traditional narrative. It isn't even set from a point of view that fits traditional narrative. It's one same motion, the reaching out towards evolution, the future, that is all of mankind and perhaps ever will be. It's crazy that it works. There's so much experimental to this film, in service of something that I think was planned to be huge and reach a vast audience. Much of it is pure cinema, visuals and audio alone, for many long, and I mean long, sequences. If you were to look at inspirations for this, a lot of it would be in animation. A lot of early film and animation consisted of drawn and with time computerized shapes and vectors, moving synchronized to classical music. I am really glad I went for the 4K to see this in. But in addition to stunning, rigorously perfected visuals, we have the audio. The sound in this movie is undoubtedly the most masterpiece-making thing about it, if we had to pick one. If you're talking about immersion into a world of space, technology, zero grav, and cosmic scale, this is it. Bar none, the greatest that will maybe ever do it. Not just the diegetic sound. Oh no. The score is vividly cosmic. It goes beyond just the parts we all know, like the do, do, to paralyzingly terrifying choral pieces that actually feel like you're coming into contact with a higher being beyond our comprehension. It's very funny how Kubrick, in taking on a film about humanity to its purest essence, made it the most purely Kubrick film ever. It's kind of his brand, his worldview, taking on a life of its own and being the movie, instead of a lens it's filtered through. Dave is our main character in the second part of the film, and if you thought Kubrick played with mannequined heroes before, you haven't seen Dave manning the Jupiter mission like the singularity point between man and AI. But that's what makes it so fascinating, that the conflict of this section is between him and Hal. It's like no matter what stage humanity is in, there's only one oasis to drink from, and we have to kill a rival being to pass on to the next. Like Cro-Magnon versus Neanderthal. I want to shout out how stunningly Kubrick redefines what violence looks like in this act. It's such a heightened state to watch a film in. And it's the same story, different time on a moving line. And again, to this being purely Kubrick, I don't know if I can say that this was purely a good thing, but he manages to play so much of his cheekiness inside of the film. Starting with those ape humans is such a choice. It really boils down the lens Kubrick paints human beings under. I mean, it's a creepy sequence. It's uncanny, and yes, a funny sequence to behold. Suburban Sasquatch is a film that just came out now. That's a comedy about just watching, like, Sasquatch people actually be animalistic Sasquatch people. That seems like a concept that was done today, but that's kind of what's happening in the first act. I mean, imagine going to the theater for this epic Kubrick film. It begins, and you just have, like, 30 minutes of 8 people grunting and shouting at each other, killing each other, getting eaten by leopards, and just sitting around in a naked landscape. But after sitting through that, you've been primed to see the parallels between the most base definition of human and the most utopian. I swear Kubrick made sure that his actors moved and posed in various ways that connected even this highly polite, civilized anthropology to that of the animalistic one. Same story, different time. It might seem like a microscopic thing to point out, but this vision of all the past and future aims to eschew all the trappings of the year it was actually made in. And besides Kubrick insistently planting his fingerprints throughout the project, this white, classical scored, Victorian forward vision of mankind's next stage of development does reveal its biases. But on the other hand, I mean, check again for when this was made, and there's only one reaction. 1968? 68? Look at other movies from that year, other science fiction movies, and explain how this level of vision came to be. Oh, Barbarella's from that year too? Forget all that other crap I said. But honestly, I could see it changing to a 10 at any time. It was definitely made to be included in the human record put onto Voyager. The seminal 1950 noir In a Lonely Place by Nicholas Ray. Humphrey Bogart here plays the human embodiment of his name, but obviously the script needed something less cartoonish, so they went with the name Dixon Steele. This is just about as classic as a classic Hollywood picture can get. The whole golden era razzmatazz, snappy dialogue, suit and tie men, and Paris Fashion Week dames, introduced on cameras smothered with gel. The scene is set in old Tinseltown proper. Steele's a screenwriter himself who's had his hits, but is in the midst of a slump. He's a pugnacious fella, to put it lightly. He's got a kind of tired charm to him, and the fights he starts could be chalked up to a sense of justice. A script written for a film centering on a screenwriter certainly has to be up to snuff, and this one is. It definitely is. Tight, economical, but underneath also carries a serious, incisive exploration of a kind of male aggression that ran loose a lot more in this time. The ways it could drive a wedge between the relationship of men and women, leaving a poisoned earth full of loneliness from which love cannot grow. For something considered a classic of the noir genre, it doesn't really fit inside the traditional mold of hard-boiled detectives and dealers of the underworld. The crime that's committed, on its face, doesn't even have anything to do with our characters. It's a love story. But the love story becomes haunted by the mere presence of the murder of a woman, and the investigative lens it puts over Steele as a man. Like how some crimes reverberate in the public consciousness because they expose a sickness that was present even before its material manifestations. And thus a murder becomes a tool to explore a part of America's shadow in this love story turned sour. The Ballad of Steele and Grey feels immediate, beyond even the artifice of the whole Hollywood sets and production vibe, which is entertaining. These characters are endearing and the story resonated. In a Lonely Place is a certified classic. Alright, last film. I chilled out after this. The 1989 mystery, Chameleon Street by Wendell B. Harris Jr. Where has this film been? I caught it on the new Criterion 24/7 at 3 in the morning, and I was just like, what the hell is this? I stayed up and completed the whole thing, even though I felt like I was half conscious. I rewatched it a week later, and sadly, it's not quite as good as when combined with Delirium, but I don't want to lower the rating. This film is like an entity unto itself. Wendell B. Harris directed and starred in this, and his charisma overfloweth. As William Douglas Street, he narrates over his whole story, and being carried by his rich voice and colorful delivery is enough to make the film work. On one hand, his pride and ego is ahead of his intelligence, but in the end it's like, shouldn't we demand to be in positions we're worthy of? He does possess intelligence, and reaches some of his higher potential through the opportunities he faked himself into. It's like he's targeted as persona non grata because he strips the facade of the barriers of entry that divide us into classes of higher and lower worth. I would describe its style as plainclothes. The footage has that stuffy, shot-on-video quality. You'd expect these to be recreations of workplace training videos. But in terms of technique, it's throwing everything at the wall, cut frenetically, schizophrenically. The combination seems fit for the 90s satires and postmodern indie films. It's like the Pixies of art house indie. As things continue on, personas piling up, the surreal becomes stronger, and jolts of very cinematic imagery emerge. By the time it's over, you have this identity soup that you could pull back frame by frame, costume by costume, for this immense conflicted portrait of a man. Even the credits are important. It's one of the best parts of the film, in my opinion. He's living a whirlwind of a life. It's not about logic, it's the experience, and it's electric. So much fun watching this film. It's like something that should be really recommendable, but it's so weird. Give this the cult classic status it deserves, damn it. Okay, that's it for my reviews. I was kind of going for recommendations, but let's face it, these are reviews. This thing's 50 minutes long. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. Hope you got something out of it.